My presentation will be significantly different from the other presentations in this conference, as I will present an exhibition that was realized in 2022-23, which can be seen as a kind of precursor of the Metropolis research project. The presentation will be a virtual guided tour during which, after a short introduction, we will walk, or rather run, through the rooms. Photographs of the spaces representing each thematic unit will be accompanied by slides showing a few important pieces from the works exhibited there. The exhibition Magyar Modern, Ungarische Kunst, Hungarian Art in Berlin, from 1910 until 1933, presented the works of Hungarian artists working in Berlin in the first third of the 20th century. The exhibition at the Berlinische Gallery was organized in cooperation with the Museum of Fine Arts and the Hungarian National Gallery, and was open from November the 3rd, 2022 until the beginning of February 2023. The two curators from the two institutions were Ralf Burmeister and myself. There were 3 curator assistants participating in the project. Here I show the German assistant curators, Nils Philippi and Antonia Wolf. And my colleague Rita Rödönyi was the curator assistant of mine here in Budapest. And some words on the catalog. I was glad that the catalog was conceived and realized in a way that it was structured in accordance with the logic and the structure of the exhibition, and each essay was linked to a chapter of the exhibition. Among the authors of the catalog were staff members of the Hungarian National Gallery and the Museum of Fine Arts, in addition to myself, as a former staff member, Anikó Katona, Marian Gergely, and Márton Orosz. And a participant of our conference, the keynote speaker of today, Eva Forgács, was also the author of the catalog. As you can see, the graphic designers chose the magazine Ma as a source of inspiration for the layout of the catalog. And now let's start with a guided tour, a virtual tour of the exhibition. On the slides with the interior photos, I also show the floor plan of the exhibition in the top right corner, highlighting the current part in space of the space in gray. The exhibition focused on artists and works of art directly related to Berlin. This was defined on the basis of 3 criteria. First, the artist had to have been a resident of Berlin for a certain period of time. Second, and or the work had to have been made there. And third, and or it had, the artwork had to have been exhibited in Berlin. These criteria led to the inclusion of well-known artists and emblematic works, as well as lesser-known or little-known artists, sometimes which works that we did not even know existed. Consequently, apart from the internationally renowned artists who were well known to the Berlin audience, for example, László Moholy-Nagy, Marcel Breuer, György Kepes, the majority of the participants were completely unknown to them. We therefore tried to bring artists with unreadable and unpronounceable names closer to the audience by giving them a face. In the entrance zone, just before entering the first room, visitors were confronted with a long portrait gallery. Here you could see mainly self-portraits, but there were also portraits by other artists, and we tried to use a variety of media, including sculpture, a few photographs, and even, as you can see, a palm print. The opening year in the title of the exhibition, 1910, referred to the Great Hungarian Exhibition held at Paul Cassiras, in which the latest efforts were represented by numbers of the Group of the Eight, which had been started shortly before. This is what the name Berlin Debut refers to. In room 1, we see a selection of the artists of the Eight, and we also included works by earlier generations of Hungarian modernists who had also exhibited in Berlin at different places already before the First World War. For example, József Rippl, Rónai, Károly Ferenczy. Room 2, with the title Revolutions and Emigration, was a short corridor that showed the Berlin audience the historical and social events that were behind the wave of emigration of the Hungarian artists. Artists who had played an active role in the revolutions following the First World War and during the Council or Soviet Republic fled abroad, mainly to Berlin, after the fall of the Council Republic due to retaliations and the so-called White Terror and the rise of anti-Semitism. In addition to outstanding works of poster art of the period, one painting was also on display and an example of the counter-revolution's pictorial politics, which, as we see, reflected on an earlier motif, the man with the hammer. Room 3, and the avant-garde networking, was a longer corridor, and here the focus was on the works of Lajos Kassák and the members of the MA journal circle who emigrated to Vienna. This avant-garde networking activity was shown on the example of Ma, that had already been in contact with the Berlin-based magazine Der Sturm in the earlier Budapest period, with which the relationship became even closer after 1920. The two journals were juxtaposed and replaced in two display cases, you see it on the right, together with the publications such as Kassák's poems published in Berlin or Ernő Kalai's book, The New Hungarian Painting. The individual works of art primarily showcase the art of the Kassák circle's picture architecture, and the works were selected to be interconnected within the exhibition. For example, Moholy Nagy's picture architecture number 3 was displayed on the opposite wall as a Ma cover, while the Great Machine of Emotion was shown here as a Der Sturm cover, and in the next room as the original oil painting. This is the next room, and this room and the two adjoining smaller cabinets were themed the most significant medium and site of Hungarian artist presence in Berlin, Herwart Walden's Der Sturm, both the magazine and the gallery, Hungarians at the Storm. The spectrum of artists reproduced and exhibited here was quite broad and heterogeneous. Alongside the highly popular decorative expressionism of Béla Kádár and Hugo Scheiber, works by János Matisztajcs, who belonged also to the Ma circle, or Moholy Nagy and Péry, who were then moving further to constructivism, were on show. The catalog unit Satellites was divided into 3 blocks in the exhibition. The first unit was placed in a separate room for practical, specifically for conservational reasons. Among these works on paper, mainly graphic portfolios were exhibited. Well-known pieces, we have just seen Péry's portfolio. In connection with the Moholy Nagy and the Kastner portfolio, I should mention that previous exhibitions with similar aspects focused on Hungarian artists in exile in Germany, with a particular emphasis on artists associated with the Bauhaus. For example, the exhibition in the middle of the 80s, Wechselwirkungen in Kassel. In the satellites cabinet opposite, works of artists who did not or did not only exhibit their works in Der Sturm, but in other Berlin galleries were given place. In my catalogue essay with the title Hungarians Everywhere, it was a quote, Contacts, Friendships, Teamwork, I presented the network of contacts and cooperation of the Hungarian artists in emigration, living, working, and exhibiting in Berlin. In this context, I explored how artists who, from today's point of view, are distant from each other, were often in close contact with each other. This often went back to the earlier periods of Hungarian art, such as, for example, the Nagybánya artist colony. For example, in the case of Béla Czóbel and the Ferenczy twins, and even József Nemes-Lamper visited Nagybánya. The next unit was entitled Picture Concrete Architecture, and this short corridor led to the block dealing purely with architecture. On the left wall, alongside his constructivist compositions, were Kassak's three-dimensional picture architectures, specifically his architectural designs, continuing the theme of the previous room. On the right side, one could see the architectural designs and also the realized buildings of Fred Forbát. And the next room, with the title Urban Design section, the presentation of Fred Forbát's buildings in Berlin continued, but in this unit, we went back to the period before the First World War. The important theater buildings of Oskar Kaufmann in Berlin provided a link to Moholy-Nagy's theater works, his set designs. And it was here that Marcel Breuer, whose architectural designs and completed buildings we showed through magazines and photographs. Then comes the third and last part of satellites, where already familiar names were repeated, such as Béla Czóbel, a long-time resident in Berlin who participated in many exhibitions at different places. Next to him, another former D8 member, his colleague Lajos Tihanyi, who moved to Paris a few years later and who supported a young painter who came to Berlin from Brașov, Gyula Halász, his original name. He later took the name of his hometown, and so he is known as the photographer Brassai. It was a revelation for everybody that two of his early paintings were found and loaned for the exhibition. And the case of Sándor Bortnyik was a good example that, although he did not live in Berlin, but he exhibited his works there. In the following room, there was another change, a new medium, photography. The next section, photography and film, was divided in two parts. In the first unit, only photographs were exhibited. Here, the focus was on the human figures, with photographs of the carefree, even luxurious life in Berlin, partly published in magazines, juxtaposed with images of poor people and urban squalor. The second room, photography and film unit, focused on the city, the built environment, and these photographs also represented the Neues Sehen, the new vision. Also works we've already seen, lighting in the city. Here, several works are paired in such a way that a better-known artist is shown with a composition or motif from a lesser-known artist in a similar setting, for example, such as Moholy-Nagy and Judith Karas with the Funkturm Berlin. Here, I would like to point out again that the exhibition presented a number of artists who are mainly considered Bauhaus artists, but now it's clear how the Berlin years, before or after the Bauhaus years, represent a significant chapter in their careers. The artists on this slide, apart from Kepes, studied or worked at the Bauhaus. And in this room, we screened the first film of the exhibition, Moholy Nights Light Play, Black, White, Gray. The room entitled Moving On from Berlin, it was the last space of the exhibition, also hosted a Moholy Night film, the medially experimental ABC in sound. And this last room, however, as the exhibition drew to the close in 1933, was a showcase for younger, mainly communist artists who created political caricatures in illegality. On the other hand, we exhibited works that illustrated the political events and art-related developments that forced most Hungarian artists to emigrate again after the Nazi takeover. Afterwards, visitors stepped out into the gallery's main hall, at the far end of which the guided tour began. The portrait gallery ended on the wall now to the left, and we can also see an entrance to the architecture room, with Miklós Bandi's and Stella Simon's film Hands and Moholy Nights' iconic Berlin Still Life on 3 surfaces, which closed the exhibition. And so, at the end of the exhibition, we are back at the start, and the visitors in Berlin were able to view the portrait gallery once more, and this time, hopefully, no longer completely unfamiliar with the artist in the exhibition. And here, I would like to go back to what I said at the beginning of my presentation. I said that this exhibition can be seen as a kind of precursor, a preparatory project for this Metropolis research program. Years of research and preparatory work brought forward so many names, works, and themes that we were not able to include many of them in this exhibition or even in the catalogue. This is why the need arose to explore in more detail the activities of Hungarian artists working in Berlin and in other metropolises abroad. Thank you.